Good evening. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming together tonight, and welcome to the 2022 presentation of the Preston Robert Tisch Award in Civic Leadership. I'm Dan Porterfield, the President and CEO of the Aspen Institute. It's great to be with you today and in person and enjoying the holiday season in New York City. I'm so pleased also to welcome our virtual audience and grateful that we're able to offer a hybrid opportunity for those here in person and the many, many, many more watching online. The Tisch Award was created to honor Preston Robert Tisch and his legacy of leadership, public service, and philanthropy. This award honors an individual who embodies the spirit and values of Preston Robert Tisch, and who's driving change in her or his community while championing the Aspen Institute ideals of inclusive dialogue, values-based leadership, and action on some of the most pressing issues affecting the world today. The award and the yearly programs in our series, Conversations with Great Leaders, are supported through the generosity of the Tisch family, Steve, Laurie, Jonathan, and Lizzie Tisch, and the Laurie M. Tisch Illumination Fund. Thank you so much, Laurie, for your support. Now, our honorees over the past 13 years have been quite impressive, including John Lewis, Billie Jean King, Darren Walker, Michael Bloomberg, Mitch Landrieu, Sonia Sotomayor, Wynton Marsalis, Misty Copeland, Cecile Richards, quite a group. And tonight, it's even better. We are so excited to honor Anna Deavere Smith, world-renowned playwright, actress, creator, citizen, and gracious friend and trustee of the Aspen Institute. Laurie will say a little bit more about Anna shortly. But let me say simply that the Aspen Institute has no better friend, role model, supporter, advocate, example to us all than Anna Deavere Smith. Please. She's probably thinking, Dan, how many times have I told you don't step on the applause line? But Laurie came to us with the idea to honor Anna this evening. It was so perfect, so right for the Aspen Institute, because our mission is to try to create a more free, just, equitable, and humane society. And we do that better and in more ways because Anna Deavere Smith is such a leader in our community. So thank you, Anna. Now I have the opportunity, before introducing Laurie, who will present the award to Anna, to ask you to watch a short video about the past recipients of the Preston Robert Tisch Award in Civic Leadership, knowing that, Anna, you will be in this video in years to come. So.
I think kindness and generosity was in my father's DNA. I remember so many acts of kindness from when I was young. Anytime anybody needed something, he would take out his little brown notebook and write a note and always follow up the next day. To one of the initiatives that he's most known for, Take the Field, which rebuilt 45 playing fields in every high school that needed one. I would say everybody who won the award for civic leadership in honor of Preston Robert Tisch, they all embody what the Aspen Institute is so well known for. People who embody and have gone from success to significance.
The arts in general provide us with an understanding of why we are alive.
I try to tell young people, particularly, the more you know about history, the more you know about yourself. And because you have to know how we got there, and then how do you want to shape the future.
But until you actually bear witness to feel what the people who you're trying to help are feeling, you're not going to be empathetic enough to really know what to do.
The best ways out of poverty is a job. So as Laurie talked about getting jobs, you have to go and create jobs.
So you must never, ever give up. You must never, ever give in. Never become bitter. Be hopeful. Be optimistic.
Let's really interrogate why there are so many homeless people. Why do we live in a society that produces this much homelessness? And what are the structural underpinnings that seemingly produce and reproduce bad outcomes?
I see every challenge of a tragedy as an opportunity to get up and figure out what we have to do right.
I've said to the country about race, you can't go over it, you can't go around it, you can't go over it, you have to go through it. And going through it's painful because you have to have conversations with people that you know and people that you love. But you got to go through it to get to the other side because there is a better place.
Step back and let people hear your experiences in order for them to learn and change. That's how people connect, like through experiences.
Doing work for social justice and being able to devote your life to public service is such a privilege. Yeah. And I think sometimes people think it's a sacrifice, but to me, it's the honor of a lifetime.
One of the things that Preston Robert Tisch was known for was value-based leadership. And that's something I take very seriously, is what are your values? And what I felt my value was during the pandemic was we were going to do everything that we could to save life.
It is now my pleasure to welcome Laurie Tisch to come forward to present tonight's award. Laurie is a trustee of the Aspen Institute and president of the Laurie M. Tisch Illumination Fund. She is a champion of the arts, education, mental wellness, community, film, and winning football. Big year this year. Congratulations, Laurie. She is an amazing leader for our institute and for this community. And we're so grateful to be able to participate with you in this incredible ceremony. Thank you so much, Laurie Tisch.
Well, good evening, and thank you so much, Dan. For the football fans in the room, we were almost winners. We were not losers yesterday, playing the Commanders. But when I see my father on that screen, so he would have been so proud of this award, as he was so proud of the New York Giants and all that he did. He would have been so proud of this award, of our association with the Aspen Institute, and of the people who have been selected to get this great honor. This is the 12th year, and every year, you know, I say to Rick Loveklass, the CEO of the Laurie M. Tisch Illumination Fund, maybe we shouldn't do it anymore. We've had so many great people. Who's left? And then every year we find somebody even better, and that includes 2022. So thank you, Anna, for agreeing to accept this award and to be with us tonight. I've known Anna for a long time through mutual friends for the Aspen Institute, and I consider Anna a great friend, but I'm still a little starstruck, I have to confess. So it really is such a great pleasure and honor. In Anna's book, Letters to a Young Artist, Straight Up Advice on Making Life in the Arts, she shares with the next generation of artists some of the things learned from her own life journey. Anna wrote, "Art should take what is complex and render it simply. It takes a lot of skill, human understanding, stamina, courage, energy, and heart to do all that. It takes most of all what a great scholar of artists, the great scholar of artists and educators Maxine Green calls wide awakeness." Anna says, "I am interested in the artist who is awake, or at least as importantly, who desperately wants to wake up." That description so well fits the work that Anna has created. And anyone here, which would be just about everybody in this room, I'm sure, who has seen her plays, her performances, who've participated in civic conversations she's curated, or who have attended classes at New York's NYU's Tisch School of the Arts, knows how well that description fits Anna. Focusing on issues that challenge our society in a most deep and meaningful way, such as racism, bigotry, poverty, the school-to-prison pipeline. Her plays speak in multiple voices from multiple viewpoints, not just one, but always multiple viewpoints about the frustrations, fears, despair, and the hopes that make up American lives, especially the lives of those who are otherwise forgotten. Her work is empowering, subversive, and redemptive. For Anna, listening is a way to learn about America. And using what she has heard and learned, she presents her audience with a path to understanding as a way to awaken the possibilities of creating a more equitable and passionate and compassionate community, which we at the Aspen Institute try to do daily. She asks us to listen to and relate to every side of the story. And in these times of political and philosophical polarity, that truly is an act of real civic engagement. Anna's work has been so widely recognized. She's been awarded, how long have you had? How long do you have here? She's been awarded the Drama Desk Award, Obie Awards, Pulitzer Prize, Tony nominations, a MacArthur Genius, National Endowment for Humanities Medal presented to her by President Obama. And tonight, I am so pleased to add yet another recognition of the important work she's doing by presenting the 2022 Preston Robert Tisch Award in Civic Leadership. With this award goes a stipend which will help advance the Anna Deavere Smith Pipeline Project, which draws attention to youth who, through poverty, are vulnerable to becoming embroiled in cycles of incarceration. The next phase of this project will focus on young women ages 14 to 20 using performance workshops to help them tell their important stories, and using these stories to create an artistic piece that awakens all of us to the work needed to achieve a just and equitable society. Anna, can you come up for your award? On behalf of my brothers, my family, and the Aspen Institute, I am so pleased and honored to present this award to you and to welcome you to our family and to the Aspen Institute family of great leaders. Don't go away. Actually, you can take your seat. Take your seat. Because I also want to introduce another friend. Tonight, Anna will be in conversations with Kate Levin, who all of you know is another tremendous civic leader who has had enormous impact on the cultural life of New Yorkers and really people everywhere. Kate heads the cultural assets management team at Bloomberg Associates and also oversees Bloomberg Philanthropies' huge and very diverse arts program, which supports artists and arts organizations internationally. She has had a long career in public service as New York City Department of Cultural Affairs Commissioner for 11 years under Bloomberg, and in the Cultural Affairs Department of the Koch administration. We're really dating ourselves. She was only about 7 when she did that, but did a great job. Kate has always been a staunch advocate for the arts, especially as an economic engine in New York City and as a tool for change, bolstering pride in our city, increasing tourism, and making the arts available for everyone. I've known Kate a very long time, well, since the Koch administration, and you will see tonight what I've always seen, which is somebody who is filled with wit and charm, an incisive mind, and abundant energy and empathy. So Kate, please join me on the stage.
Thank you so much, Laurie. It was a pleasure to know your dad a little bit, particularly to understand his driving style. So it's exactly. So it's a particular privilege to be here this evening and to get to talk to Anna Deavere Smith. So Anna, I wanted to start with asking you how it is that you became a playwright. Understood how people become actors, but how'd you make the shift?
Well, first of all, I just have to thank you so much, Laurie, because I feel so powerfully what your family has done for this city and for other places in the world, and what you do in the philanthropy that you do, I think is something, I think you're one of the first people who heard me use this expression, Kate, radical hospitality. And what that means, in addition to, hotels, is, well, or this really began with an idea I had about a radical welcome that we need in the world of estrangement. And so the wholeness that your philanthropy brings to our society is really a model for all of us who strive to be a part at all of civic leadership. And I just want to thank you, and I hope the rest of you will help me thank her. And Dan, thank you so much. And I'm very excited about, the newness that you're bringing to the Aspen Institute. And I just love talking to you, you know that. And I always leave our conversations inspired and yet with a kind of realism about the world. I learned a new expression about that, a new way, Stephanie and Kimber and Caroline and Lisa, of thinking when people ask you, is there any hope, which is optimism in the heart, cynicism of the mind, or pessimism of the mind. So it makes us both watchful and it makes us want to move forward. And I always feel that way whenever I leave conversations with you. And then my friend Kate Levin, who I'm hauling out for the second time this season to talk to me, because I just love talking to you. And I feel it's an act of generosity to share how I talk with you, with other people, because the art of conversation is really, frankly, as important to me as the theater. And you're just really one of my favorite conversants ever.
I'm done. Bye. So this question, you started out as an actor, and then you couldn't get parts, you got interested in other things. What led you to get into creating plays?
Well, I wrote my first play while I was still in acting school, and I didn't have a typewriter. And this was at the American Conservatory Theater. And back in those days, before everybody here was born, so much was done by a spirit of philanthropy of, well-off women, who made things happen in different places. And there were a group of well-off women called the Friends of ACT, and they had an office. And they said that I could come in and use their typewriter in the morning, just so I was gone by, 9 o'clock when they came in there to raise money in the Friends of ACT. And so I wrote my first plays on that typewriter while I was a second-year student at ACT, American Conservatory Theater. And so it was in the process of studying acting, which wasn't a plan originally, that I became interested in playwriting. And I can't remember what kicked that into gear, but while I was studying to be an actress and then got put in the company, I spent every moment that I had, free moment that I had, trying to turn myself into a playwright. And the only way to become a writer is to write.
So your amazing book, Talk to Me, Listening Between the Lines, you go through how it is when you listen to people, when you listen to the characters who people your work, what you're listening for, the breaks, the gaps. Can you explain to us what you mean by that?
Yeah, and you can help me a little bit because you're truly a Shakespeare scholar. It was when I was learning in that first year to what I would say speak in Shakespeare, because it is another language, that I had this remarkable teacher, Juanita Pat Rice, who said her theory, and you can tell me if it's right because you're a real scholar. She said that you can tell what's going on with a character by the rhythm of how they speak, and that what we expect is iambic pentameter, which is da 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 da. And her theory was that if that changes in the second beat, that means that the character's going through something. And the example that she gave is in King Lear, when the world is falling apart, and he says, never, 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 which is all upside down instead of ah. And that idea, which I heard within my first week of studying acting for the first time in my life, just blew my mind. And at first I tried to learn everything I could about Shakespeare. And when I decided I wasn't going to become a Shakespeare scholar, I thought, well, what if I can get people in real life to talk in trochees, which is that da-da. And that's really what I ended up, to date. It's really the center of how I'm actually in the theater, is through trying to understand where language, for those of us who speak in words, where language is associated with identity. And then the last thing I'll say about that, particularly interesting to me, is that I actually believe it's not just about our identity that we can find in those rhythms and the rhythmic breaks, but it's the identity of the world around us, that we are really speaking in patterns that tell us something about the time in which we live. And I'm particularly interested in the all trochee world. I go and talk to people when I'm pretty sure that the language is going to be broken up and upside down.
So yeah, iambic pentameter mirrors the heartbeat.
Well, you tell me.
Just saying. So that's the
Da-da,
theory. Yeah,
da-da, right.
exactly. It's a bastardized agglomeration of lots of other languages, which is pretty interesting that it has become so dominant. But that kind of rhythm persists, and it's a fascinating notion that societies are held together by something as aesthetic as the community of sounds that people are making. So living in harmony, what you're saying, is a literal thing.
Well, yes, I mean, there's language, but when you say that, there's also music, and how the music of our times also tells us something about how we're living, whether that's popular music, or I mentioned to you this weekend, I had the great honor of being a part of the honoring of Tanya León, great modern American classical composer. And so we also hear it, if we were to compare, and I'm no scholar of modern classical music, but if we listen to the modern classical music, American classical music, it's quite different than the classical music that Tanya studied, that Julia Wolf studied, that so many of the classical musicians that we know studied, and they have changed what that sounds like, and it's relevant to them, to the world they hear, I think.
So this question of the world that you hear, your first major performance, Fires in the Mirror, came up at the time that hip hop was starting, that there was a whole sense of sound, of community sounds, sort of not just top down sounds, but bottom up sounds, being understood and sort of being created into a landscape that lots of other people wanted to participate in. That the style of theater that you do is now referred to as documentary theater. You're interviewing real people about real issues, and in the theme of this evening, exploring civic leadership, how is it that you select the moments that you want to dive into? What made that particular incident, or the Twilight Los Angeles piece that had such a brilliant revival last year? Why those moments?
Well, I should first of all say that the place that I was able to, because the theater, you and I have talked about this before publicly, I think, the theater really did not understand what I was doing and weren't interested. But in the 80s, universities like Princeton, Penn, hired me to come and interview people about things that weren't going well, that had to do with race and gender. So for example, Princeton commissioned me to make a piece in their 20th year of coeducation, when, among other things that weren't going well, is two of the eating clubs were still insisting that women could not be a part of the clubs, right?
Because we don't chew with our mouths closed. No?
I guess that's why. I think that's exactly why. And then there were other things going on because of the way the canon was changing with regard to, in particular, Black studies and other studies that were not of the white male patriarchy, as they said in that day. And so that was really important, that I got a chance there and at Penn to go and interview people who did not agree and who were very emotional about their disagreement, and to put on these plays, in each case just one night stands. But it really taught me how to listen to disagreement inside of institutions or cultures. You know, Princeton was a specific kind of a culture. Penn was a specific kind of culture. And so by the time that George Wolfe, who was not then the head of the Public Theater, Joanne Akalitis was doing a festival, and he knew about this work and invited me to come to New York. I was on a fellowship at Harvard at the time, and they gave me, I think, 2 train tickets to come down. And George said, well, what are you going to make it about? And I said, I don't know, maybe I'll chase ambulances. And I came down, and it was in the fall, right after the Crown Heights riots. And what interested me immediately about Crown Heights is that nobody agreed. And it was very clear. It was very clear. As we know, young Gavin Cato was killed when the car and an entourage of the Grand Rebbe hit a sidewalk, killed Gavin. The Black people said it was a murder. The Hasidim, said that it was an accident. And so it was just amazing to go talk to a rabbi who talked about it as an accident, to go talk to Al Sharpton and Sonny Carson, who thought it was not just a murder, but a slap in the face, to the entire community. And so that was a pretty easy structure to make. This person, that person, what's the reality, right? And so, that's how I made Fires in the Mirror. But I couldn't have done it. I just want to say this because if anybody's an arts educator here, I couldn't have done it without the fact that I was able to rehearse this in university environments.
So you make it sound inevitable, but of course it's a whole process of figuring out who to talk to, how to talk to them. And sometimes I've had the privilege of seeing your work. You will change the lineup or the order or add different voices. Most recently in Notes from the Field, between the first and second time I saw it, you had added Brian Stevenson. Can you talk a little bit about, as you put your pieces together, how do you edit? Because you're the playwright, you're the dramaturg, you are putting together something that does end up feeling inevitable, but it's entirely artful and constructed.
Well, let me say, first of all, that Notes from the Field about the school to prison pipeline was an unusual project because it was not my idea. And it's also unusual, Laurie, because it really started through philanthropy. So usually, we're going to philanthropists to get dough. In this case, philanthropists were coming to me to say, you need to do something about this. You need to use the theater as a place that people can learn about the school to prison pipeline. And most people had never heard of it. I'd never heard of it. And it was someone at the Open Society who asked me if I'd ever heard of it. And I said no. And she said, well, you got to come over and you got to hear about it. And she literally brought like, oh, I don't know, 15 people, maybe 20 people from around the country who were working on it. And I spent a day and my mind was blown. And but I couldn't do anything about it because it was in a TV show. And then I forgot about it. And then someone from Atlantic Philanthropies called me up and said, a year later, I heard you might want to do something about this. So this was a case of working, and for the artists in the room, it was a wonderful way to take what I could do and to join hands with people who were trying to get at it another way. And I interviewed 250 people in 5 geographic areas. And one of the reasons the works change every time I go to a different place is why not? I mean, that's what this whole era of new playwriting is supposed to be about, right? Is using the resources that these theaters have to revise the work. I always put together a room where there will be disagreement. I choose people to have in the room who have a heartier, a more robust interest in disagreement than me. I mean, people, you use the word, did you use the word subversive? No, what was the word, use the word? People use those kind of words about me, controversial, blah, blah, blah. But I actually don't enjoy conflict, believe it or not. I find myself in conflict, but I don't really enjoy it. But I know people who enjoy it. And so I invite them into the room, and I have all this material, terrifying amount of material to learn. And I go in on the first day, sometimes it's like 4 hours long, and I present the work. The people who aren't going to agree argue with the director. I watch them argue. I go home and revise the play and come back with a different play the next day. And this goes on all the way through the entire rehearsal process. And then here we are, dress rehearsal or the night before opening with the producer pacing around the dressing room saying, it's too long, it's too long. And by then, maybe lots of people in there. I love having the costume designer who I usually bring on board before I even get a director, Ann Hold Ward. And, we're sitting there killing the babies, as we say, of the people who are still in the play who can't be in it because it can't be so long. And so sometimes it's about taking those people later and figuring out a way to put them in it and then thinking about who could be sacrificed. In the case of the show that you saw in London, there were two big differences. One was that by then I'd had an opportunity, I was able to include a woman from Finland who I had interviewed. Some of you know that Finland is said to have one of the best education systems in the world. And I had been fascinated by a story that I'd heard Brian Stevenson tell several times. And every time he told it, and it's like one of those stories that just silences the room every time he told it. And he told it the exact same way every time. So then I was very interested in that story as a kind of organic performance. And I went down to Montgomery and I thought, I've got to get him to tell me this on tape, which he did. And then once he told it, then I thought, how am I going to get him to talk to me in a way that breaks that pattern? And I did. And so I included that in Notes from the Field. And also what I learned about Brian Stevenson in rehearsal is that of all the people in that play, and I think there's 19, which is rather small for me. I mean, I think Twilight had 43 people. That is the most, that story that he tells, that text, everybody in the room had a relationship to somehow, no matter what their race or age was. And it's because what he's offering is that he realized when he was unable to save the life of a man who was going to get the death penalty that, all of he works with broken people in broken systems. And it occurred to him that he does that because he's broken too. And people really responded to that idea. In England, in London, you know how they can be. I think they're changing, but I think it's just really a universal idea and so well put. And then the other thing I'll say about Brian Stevenson is one of the people who teaches me my lines. Stephanie, who's here, has taught me my lines. Kimber here has taught me my lines, and they know it's a very difficult job because I learn every utterance, not just every word. And then I work with a movement coach, former Ailey dancer. I learned gestures, so it's really, really hard work. Trapped in, just in rooms for hours and hours. And one of the people also who taught me is Daniel Ratner. Now, Daniel, who's I met when he just left Princeton, was a classics major. And one of the keys that helped me learn Brian Stevenson is Daniel realized while he was teaching it to me, he speaks in threes, which is this classic, which you probably know about. In classic oratory, it's one of the ways. So they realized, so every time he had a major idea, he spoke of it in threes, which was this incredible, organizing way of being able to learn the piece. And so somebody like Brian, and then at the moment that he didn't do that, when it disrupted, then it's needs to be in a play of mine.
So, as if anybody had any doubt, everything you've just said confirms that your approach is as meticulous, as thoughtful, has as much integrity as the finest historians around. And I would argue that a number of your works are, in fact, some of the best works of history that we have. And yet, historians are accorded a status and a credibility that theater artists aren't. I was interested to see that President Biden's strategy in the midterms was recently credited to having a bunch of conversations with historians. But I'm just wondering, in your experience, playwriting, history writing, same, different?
Different. I'm not a historian. We're here with a great historian, Caroline Elkins from Harvard, a meticulous historian whose most recent book deals with the violence of the British Empire. And it's, 800 pages long? And then another book of hers about the genocide in Kenya, Imperial Reckoning, is, she goes, that's a historian. I'm not. But history isn't it interesting? I'm thinking about one of my favorite conversations ever, which is between Margaret Mead and James Baldwin. And they get into this fight about facts, where she wants to know about facts. And he says, I don't care about your facts, because they're not my facts. Right? So I think the thing I can do in the theater is debate the facts. And, that's what happened with Fires in the Mirror. It's it was an accident, it was a murder, right? In the theater, we don't have to have one idea. We don't have to have a theory. We need a conflict and a dialogue. And that's very different. Now, if it serves the purpose of enriching history, and the great plays have, then we have a relationship to historians, but few of us are real historians. But what about Shakespeare? Would you say Shakespeare was a real historian? What would you say about that? I mean, Richard III did not have his teeth before his eyes.
Apparently not. The guy that got dug up from the parking lot a couple of years ago was not that guy. I mean, but I think he is one of the great popularizers of history. And that's sort of what's fascinating about what, frankly, historians do. They interpret the historical record, and theater artists do as well. The way Shakespeare was, because his life depended on it in many ways, an apologist for the Tudor regime in England. So that's what he put out. And I don't think he thought of himself as being responsible to historic fact. But to your point, I think the notion of what history was and what power was different. What I would say back to you is, I mean, let's face it, you are the most versatile cabinet level appointee I know of. We are talking with someone who has been a presidential press secretary in the Shepard administration. You were an attorney general in the Dalton administration. That's Madam Secretary. And of course, our beloved director of the NSA in the Bartlett administration, the West Wing. But seriously, I think because of that portrayal, not only is there a Nancy McNally for president, boomlet every 4 years, but I think more people know what the NSA is because of that show and because of your portrayal in it. So, there is certainly an intersection in the same way, that was part of Shakespeare's brief, between history and that kind of entertainment. So, having had so many roles, you were merely, I think, a court clerk in one of your most recent shows. But just saying, the having had that experience of popular entertainment taking on government, any thoughts, any experiences from being on set, any sense of how that writing works to popularize what government is?
Well, first of all, it's a good thing that Aaron Sorkin was open to correction, because one of the people who's so important to us in the Aspen Institute, Madeleine Albright, Secretary Albright, is the one she was very proud of the fact that it's because of her that I had that job. She didn't know I would be the one selected, but they were filming on her street, and she stopped them and said that the role that John Spencer played he couldn't do all those things. And that's not what the chief of staff does. You can imagine Madeleine saying this. And that you needed to have a Secretary of State, and it needed to be a woman. And so I got called to do it, almost didn't do it. And it's a good thing I did, because I think when people recognize me in real life, it's because they remember that show, which was so many years ago. But, and you've heard my funny story about this, that when I conceded to go out there to do the part, I thanked Aaron, who was standing outside of the set smoking in the parking lot. And I said, well, thank you so much. This was, we all thought that if Bush won, the gossip was that Condoleezza Rice, who I knew because we both were professors at Stanford, that Condoleezza Rice would be National Security Advisor. So went over to Aaron and I said, thank you for this job, Aaron. Now, you in thinking of me, were you thinking about Condoleezza Rice? And he said, who? So my joke is, right now you're looking at the first Black woman National Security Advisor, right here, right here. I predated Condoleezza Rice.
Absolutely. But
so that was, in this case, it wasn't correct. Do you know what I mean? The West Wing, as much as we wanted it, it wasn't correct. And then the Secretary of State told him how to correct it, and he listened up. But that's Madeleine for you too.
But that's also entertainment adapting to how you tell a good story. And the other thing, I mean, that obsesses me, and this is the problem, Laurie, when you invite a groupie to be the moderator here, but this issue of, again, there's sort of this unholy alliance between entertainment and government, and it's, may never have been stronger in American society than it is right now. There was Paul Ryan did this interview, I guess 2 weeks ago, where he talks about there are legislators and then there are entertainers. And there's a whole discourse around how the January 6th congressional committee hearings were particularly impactful because the committee went out and hired a television producer to tell a story. And yet this notion of entertainment and government, it makes people so queasy. Given the nature of your work, given that you work in the world of current events of the moment, and yet you say you're not a historian, sort of believe you. Any thoughts about why you think we're in this moment where actors get to entertain, but they don't get to be part of social commentary?
Well, I mean, we are part of social commentary, but I think there's something about us that, I mean, there's something about us, even though I think, you know, the right movie star could run for president in the next election, right? And I'm sure there's Democrats talking to different movie stars right now. But there is something about us that I think that is in our DNA, that we are coming from a tradition of the fool. And so to me, our work is to look at power upside down. I don't think we should be courting power as much as we do in the arts. And I remember in one of Sartre's books about theater, he says that if you see an actor on the bus reading the financial pages, they should be upside down. But we're reading them right side up. And there is a problem there, because we should be willing not to do that. We should be, I mean, I'm a purist in that way. We should be willing, some among us in the arts, to be outside the Republic, banging on the door, knowing we'll never get in. And so I think your question, and I'm going to turn it back to you, has more to do with why, you know, most people are going to know more about movie stars and singers than they're going to know about the leadership, right? That's just the fact right now. I wonder how you see the confluences and the trust that people have for celebrities in relationship to the trust they don't have necessarily for our leaders in civic space, right? So, for example, last thing I'll say about it is the reason I moved with the pipeline project and my interest in girls is that Ruslan Ali, who actually was one of the people who came up with the data to come up with the idea of the school to prison pipeline anyway, when she was a justice in the Obama administration, she took me into McClymonds High School, which is one of the, among the poorest performing high schools in America. It's in Oakland. Huey Newton went there and so forth. I'm sure everyone, they're proud of that. But we were in this great big room of about 50 girls. And the person who convened them, one of the faculty, I think, went around the room and asked every girl to say who their role model was. Almost every girl said Oprah or Beyonce. I have a lot of admiration for Oprah or Beyonce, but just to break it up, when it got to me, I said, you know, I admire Ruslan Ali because of everything she does to try to improve education, you know, in this country, right? And so we are so enamored with celebrity that I think it's, you know, in my old-fashioned way. And lastly, I'll say that September 11th, I was on a runway of a plane that didn't take off, and Sandy Berger, who I used to call to get information about when I got a script, I said, well, what does this mean? What does that mean? By some fluke, he and I, because you couldn't get back into the city, remember they shut down everything, I got on the only thing that was moving, which was a bus going to the Marriott, I think, near the airport. I run into Sandy in the lobby, and we're like, oh my God, you know, and he gave me more information about what was going on. Can you get a room? I said, no. Can you get a room? No. Somebody came up to me and Sandy Berger and asked me what was going on, because I played the national security advisor on the West Wing. And, you know, other people were rushing up to me saying, are you on your way to Washington? Right? So, I mean, now you take over this, because you know I want to hear from you on this, because you work in the art, you've worked in the arts and you work in government. What do you think about that? Your own question.
I think people are hardwired to believe. I think they're hardwired to aspire. I think it depends on what a society serves up as a positive aspiration, or what a particular community serves up as aspirational. And, you know, I think that leadership is always a performance, and some people do it better than others. I mean, you know, interesting, the so-called entertainers we've had become great political leaders. I would say Václav Havel had a pretty good run. Vladimir Zelensky, and it's interesting because he was a total knockabout comedian. You know, bless that man and what he and his country are going through. It's the same skill set. The question is, how do you break through suspicion around the inauthenticity, the artfulness of entertainment? I mean, to me, it's going back to the
Plato.
Yeah, well, it's going back to Plato. You know, the suspicion that you don't want people to have imagination because they won't toe the line, or you know, in Shakespeare's day, the real queasiness around religion. You know, and the Reformation really happened because Henry VIII had a boner for somebody who he wasn't married to, but also there was the subtext about, you know, this Catholic thing has it has too much showbiz going for it, and there's something that is inauthentic about that level of aesthetic mediation. And you know, I think we go back and forth with all of those issues all the time. You know, since I'm a knuckle dragger, I just sit here and, you know, fix things. I'm particularly interested in how that plays out in the US right now in terms of our policy around the arts, because compared to, for example, Western Europe or so many other societies, where, as you say, I think there is much more embrace of your notion of the fool, that you have to respect artists, that they are a key form of telling society what it is. Here, I think we got sort of trapped in, you know, there was a moment of huge, you know, popular culture, high, low, there's some, you know, a lot of great scholarship around that. And it's almost as if after World War II, everybody got so nervous about being impressive and being the leader of the free world, that we got very concerned about, could we understand great art? And God forbid it was Elvis on Velvet. But so as recently as 2008, we had a congressman saying, there are real people who need money, so we're not going to give money to the NEA, making very clear that artists weren't real people and didn't have real jobs. So where I would land that question is, it has so many scary consequences right now, particularly for the creative sector, particularly for artists. You know, how do you start to make people less nervous about the difference between an entertainer and a legislator?
I'm not so sure that they shouldn't be nervous. But I don't know that that's the same, it's in the same realm as should we support the arts. I mean, we should support the arts because the arts are about beauty and desire. And I'm very clear, because of the work that I do, that I'm in partnership with people who are really changing things, right? You know, when I'm interested in kids and what happens to them in the way they live. I spent the summer in my high school doing performance labs with Black girls from Western High School, where I went to school, oldest all-girls school in the country. And then the other place I did the lab was with the Yurok tribe. And I'm very clear that I could have no access to that tribe if it weren't for my dear friend, Abby Abenanti, who's the chief judge of that tribe. And I'm also clear that Abby saves lives and I don't. I mean, maybe I've done something that's inspiring. I don't know. I don't know what the effect is. And that's part of the problem, right? We try to quantify it. And is that really, truly intellectually honest? You tell me, but she can tell me if she saved somebody's life. She can tell me that, right? And I mean, do you think we save lives?
I think
it's dangerous. I know it's dangerous for me to suggest that maybe we don't in the same way, that there's somebody in Chicago right now, I'm sure, I think I told you I'm written a libretto for an opera about gun violence in Chicago. And my whole source field for that is Arnie Duncan's project, Chicago Cred, where he's working with the shooters themselves. And there's probably somebody in Chicago right now out on the street who has status and a license to operate, talking a kid into not shooting somebody. I was grateful that I wasn't able to go there actually and do my research once I realized just how much violence there is. I don't have a license to operate. I can't be walking around the streets of Chicago talking to people without a barrage of security, right? And so, but I respect Arnie, who's willing to walk right up in it. And as he told me, a kid says, "Man, what are you doing here, white guy?" And his answer is, "I'm here because you're here." Martin Buber, right? I mean, in a way, I think that's the best thing that we in the arts can do, is to find a way to be present, to have I-thou relationships in a world where we have so many I-it relationships. The best thing we can do is dig our feet in and represent I-thou relationships, to do what we're not doing right now, which is to have the guts to go where we don't belong and to say what we should not say necessarily. I'm not talking about hate speech, but taking chances and creating places of goodwill. And, you know, Lisa and I have talked about it, and Lisa does a lot of work. I mean, you know, we had to bring Lisa into our rehearsal hall for one of the shows I'm working on about Ella Fitzgerald, because of have to get everybody ready to, in case people get upset about things that really happened in Ella Fitzgerald's life in a Jim Crow world, right? We have to bring in Lisa, who's the head of the Office of Global Inclusion at New York University, to help us figure out how to be in a room together, white and black people, talking about difficult things. So you see, you know, and you and I haven't had a chance to talk about this as much as I want to, which is what's going on in our spaces where we're supposed to work, and we're more afraid of how we're triggered by the trauma that's represented in fiction, and there's people who are really suffering. You tell me from your position and what you've done and how much you champion the arts, what kind of a state are we in terms of being able to do the work of representing, you know, that which isn't right?
I think in this country in particular, the arts have been the key vehicle that's made that ever work. And, you know, sometimes it's completely popular culture, pop fiction. I mean, arguably, it gets talked about so much, but the musical Hamilton did more to drive into people's heads the notion that the founding fathers could look differently than they had always imagined them. And what that does long-term to a society's hardwiring, I think, is incredibly profound. To your point, you know, do you save lives the same way someone doing a tracheotomy does? No. But inspiration and giving people a sense of resilience and a form in which to perceive and metabolize their challenges, you know, that's as much a part of life-saving. It happens in a different register.
I mean, I just hope that, you know, my critique, you know, and I'm outwardly criticizing my form and my discipline right now, only because I want to make it stronger. And I just don't think we should pretend we're doing what we're not doing.
But there's so much that you are doing. And the one final question I want to ask you before opening it up to others here is to talk about Black Theater United, which is a really important entity that you have led putting together in response to the murder of George Floyd, but really in response to systemic racism in the theater and on Broadway for generations. So can you talk a little bit about how that came to be and what your aspirations are for it?
Well, I am considered a founding member, but they invited me in well into its development, and I'm very pleased to have been invited because they're all like really Broadway stars, you know, Stokes and Audra and LaChanze and all them, right? And so I kind of felt like the kid, you know, in 5th grade that, you know, nobody really wanted on the team. And then I got a call from Stokes saying, "Gee, we need a writer. Will you join?" I said, "Yeah, I'll join. Thanks, everybody, for having me around." And it's not really false modesty, but I'm so impressed with them. I'm so impressed with them. And you know, Vanessa, William, all of them, you know, their love of the American theater and their wish for it to be better. And you know, there's several different groups that have come up in the arts to question the things that you and I know aren't right when it comes to not just opportunity, but just not right, not just artistic opportunity, but, who's in the hallways of all of these theaters where we've worked. And people like me and including me, even though I'm not a, Broadway star, I mean, I've helped create the American theater as it is right now.
Really a lot.
Not just because of the particular type of theater that I do, but out of goodwill, right? I mean, places that were storefronts in the 70s, I helped, and all of us helped. And yet it didn't change the way it said it was going to change. All those projects, you were a part of them, that were about diversifying audiences and diversifying the leadership. It didn't happen. And so, as we know, the murder of George Floyd opened our eyes to that. And the fact that, people in Black Theater United, that it just reminds me of growing up as I did in Baltimore. And there was this expression about, race women and race men, the people who, wanted to make things better for everybody and not just their thing that they were able to accomplish, getting educated or having more resources. And so I'm very moved by these projects that are truly about not just opportunity, but I think making the American theater better and healthier. And I'm really excited that the person who I've relied on so much, I mentioned that there's a former Ailey dancer who teaches me my gestures, Michael Leon Thomas. I'm so proud that because of these initiatives, he's training to be a producer right now. And he is so happy, right, to have made this shift into another way of doing the work. So I think that these initiatives are really about helping the theater not just give more opportunity, but to prepare the theater to be more porous to the world and to therefore do more of what you're talking about, which is to provide a kind of leadership that has to do with moral leadership, has to do with desire and beauty and hope, and just being better at having a thumbprint of the world that we live in so that our audiences can respond and think and reflect about their own lives and their own needs.
And that's what I would say the arts are uniquely capable of doing and is so urgently needed now. So I think we have a little bit of time for a few questions. And I think we may have magical microphone assists in both aisles. So
Anna, sorry, bad voice. Could you talk a little bit about your project with girls a little bit more? And aren't you also beginning to teach actors to do what you do? Engage more actors to be on your stage?
It just is the case that thanks to the Signature Theater, I have had an opportunity to have 2 of my plays done by other actors. And so it's sort of opened up now this understanding, which was always the case, that my work was designed not just for me as a one-person show, but the work was always designed for other actors. And because of Signature inviting me to restage or be a part of the restaging of Fires in the Mirror and Twilight Los Angeles, that I've been able to revise the play. It's going to be a new script, really, that makes it really clear that Twilight can be done by others. So it was done at the Signature, it was done at the American Repertory Theater, and it will be done with other actors at the Mark Taper Forum as the 30th anniversary. I can't believe it's 30 years of when I performed it right after the uprising in Los Angeles. So I'm not really teaching actors. It's just that I'm making it clear that the work is there to be done by others who are interested in investigating this process. And yeah, I mean, yeah, because of the 250 interviews about the school to prison pipeline, I realized that when we think about vulnerable kids, we tend to think about boys of color. As a matter of fact, I was invited while I was working on Notes from the Field, the school to prison pipeline, to go to the launch of President Obama's Brother's Keeper. You know, and it got criticized for being only about boys, but you know, at least it was something going in the right direction. And so I became interested in how, not just what happens to girls in the way of bad things, but how do they see the world around them? And so I'm building a new pedagogy. Maybe that's where the teaching idea comes in, which I call performance as a way of knowing, and taking really fantastic artists into communities with me. We're not teaching acting or music, but we're really using art, using the form and the discipline as a kind of a lens to ask them to work with us to talk about the world around them as they see it. So that's my newest project. And it's, you know, it's a departure from what I've done since 1980, which is to learn about the world by going out and interviewing people one by one and doing this massive research project that I then embody myself. I'm now using some of that, what I learned to do there in another way of really asking people to come with me to learn together. And that's also a Maxine Greene thing, you know, this idea of, or I think about the teacher in Finland, you know, that this is our class, you know, this is our project that I'm trying to learn about the world by bringing girls to learn with me, and I pay them. And by the way, they made more this summer working with me. The Native American girls made more this summer for the week than I made when I left them to go work on a workshop of my play about Billie Jean King. They made more. And so there's also, I mean, I have to ask you, what do you think about the economics of the nonprofit world and how we compensate, not the people who run the theaters, but the actors in particular? What do you think about that?
Value has nothing to do with money in the nonprofit sector. You know, if it did, teachers would make more than bank presidents, duh, right? And so, you know, we've gotten caught in this sort of supply and demand, this notion that public service somehow brings with it a huge economic sacrifice. On the one hand, you'd think we'd recognize and respect that, but if you look at who gets social prestige, it's people who make a lot of money. So I think, you know, there is a notion in terms of capitalism and markets that somehow they deliver justice. That's pretty silly. But I do think as you say, the economics of nonprofits are market driven in a way that does suppress the value and contribution that people bring to it. So that's where philanthropy comes in the US. In
And
other
crucial.
countries, it's government support that makes up that difference. So, you know, that's to me part of the reason why this nervousness about the arts versus public life, I think, has some really pernicious repercussions, because we're never going to get to the level of support for the nonprofit field, particularly the nonprofit arts, if we can't recognize the public service being provided by artists, whether it's that they're being subversive, whether they are creating communities out of impossibility, you know, whether they're providing inspiration and role models. You know, the social glue that's provided is extraordinary, but it can't be quantified. It doesn't have a bottom line, and the pay sucks. So, you know, how Humpty Dumpty gets put back together again kind of matters on that one. One last question.
I'll go a little bit maybe off topic. Speaking of entertainment, and because I deem you to be, Anna Deavere Smith, one of the most thoughtful, expansive, courageous thinkers, historians of our time. I'm going to ask if you would offer your opinion as to whether sports, another huge aspect of our world of entertainment, of our sociology, if you will, if you would compare sports' ability to impact change, to make positive change, particularly along with regard to racial relations, sort of juxtaposed against the sort of very theater. Is that something that's way off topic?
Are you in the sports business? Or?
Yeah, sort of. Yeah.
But that's relevant to tell us who you are.
I am a lawyer by training, but I am the president of the Jackie Robinson Foundation. And we've just built a museum, and we have just...
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. I ran from a meeting. I ran from a meeting where we were talking about the last question somebody asked, and I said, I'm going to see Anna Deavere Smith. This is for me tonight. And I left when the question was, how can we find more, white people who are willing, able, courageous enough to talk honestly, earnestly about race in an atmosphere of goodwill and an atmosphere where we start with the facts. That's what we're working on. We have a pretty robust program put together, but it's still hard. A couple people who are celebrities who have agreed to do it. I don't know if they will dig deeply, but we're very, very committed to having a dialogue about race in an atmosphere of goodwill, as you say, in an atmosphere of honesty, in an atmosphere, again, with a factual base that we can all agree on. It's not the theater. And it's tough. In fact, I'll ask as many people as I can tonight, if I have a chance, do you know any white people who are willing, comfortable, talking about race in a deeper way than we tend to on talk shows and et cetera? So my question is, would you be willing to expound a little bit on, whether you think sports can fit into that dialogue, can fit into that space that we desperately as a country need to address and jump full force into? I am the daughter of a white mother and a black father, and it has been a topic that has occupied my entire life, and so I am comfortable talking about anything, but I am not sure whether we're going to be able to do, as you say, the hard stuff, if we're going to be able to make progress in a long dialogue with regard to dialogue around the race issue.
Oh, I think sports are incredibly important, and again, congratulations on getting that museum off the ground. I know that it's been a long road and a lot of work, and one of Right, exactly. Well, and we started talking about sports today. And the first time I came to one of these Preston Robert Tisch Award ceremonies was for Billie Jean King. Was she the first one? Or she was the second one, maybe? Yeah, and I'll never forget it. And I'm writing a play about her and getting to know her. And in her day, there was a different fight, which is extraordinary. When you think of it now, somebody told me, I don't know this kind of stuff off the top of my head, but I think Naomi Osaka made last year $50 million. And when you think that in Billie Jean King's time, people could barely make it. Althea Gibson had to she almost committed suicide because here she'd been this great champion and she couldn't pay her rent, or as she said, you can't eat a crown after she won Wimbledon. And so there are these ways in which these arenas, whether it's the arts or whether it's sports, are also places where there's a kind of rubber hitting the road. The other thing that I think about sports, and I'll just give you this brief little anecdote. I was performing in Texas, and I had friends who knew people, and I was able to train every morning with the male basketball team's strength coach. But I had to go in to the facility at, something like 6 o'clock in the morning. And it was just amazing to me. Every morning that I went in there, there'd be other coaches there already, like watching videos about nutrition or strength. And this guy I'd see this guy walking through, one of the players often. And the guy who was training me, I think his name was Dexter. I might be wrong about that. They said, oh, that's Dexter. And when we found Dexter, he said, when we found Dexter, he weighed 400 pounds. And we got the weight off of him. And we send him out to dominate the court when he goes out. And I thought to myself, how did you know that somebody who weighed 400 pounds was a champion athlete? And Sally Jenkins is a friend of mine, and when you think of the lengths that people in sports go to find these talented people, to me, that's just a real inspiration about the lengths we could go to find mathematicians, physicists, poets. They're there, but because people they wanna win these games, right? They go to unbelievable lengths to find people and to be able to see through what somebody's offering. So I just want to say, first of all, I think we have a lot to learn from sports and the history of sports, and even to learn, through sports about the ways in which racial interactions have worked. So I would look at sports actually as a great teacher and inspiration for all of us.
Thank you so much to Anna for everything, always. I'm turning it over to Linda.
I'm Linda Lara from the Aspen Institute, and for the last 12 years, it has been my privilege to work on this program and bring you conversations like this one tonight, which has been absolutely amazing. So will you please join me in applauding our speakers? As always, thank you for coming. Thank you to our virtual audience. And we look forward to more conversations like this, maybe not quite as good as this, but up there next year. Thank you.